Series 93103, items 1 through 44, brought to you tonight in part by the Center of the Universe. I don't think that was supposed to have been funny. I could be wrong. Life is arranged so that the majority of men develop a mind and thus become humanly conscious. It is further structured so that a few can be conscious without strict reliance on mentation. The truth. It's possible for a few men to make themselves so capable. Inside of everyone is a voice that's not their own. Guess what it's normally called? Those who do not recognize that human consciousness and mentation are both quite physical, from their closest touch to their furthest remoteness, are themselves not far removed from feral bogs and primeval caves. One man thought, I don't need a TV, stereo, or PC. I've got a mind. A mind with 24-hour service and no shut-off switch. The mind is to consciousness as a ship is to the sea, except in man's instance, the vessel now seems to control the medium through which it sails. Internally, one man tried to pursue a policy of telling himself, slow down, shut up. But soon became accustomed to hearing himself say, shut up. What, I ask you, is a poor man to do? Once men get a personality, they forget that they were once simply conscious. Although this is the way things normally work, and it is not at all unusual, I thought I'd mention it anyway. Query. Can the mind be too clever for its own good? One response. It can be too noisy. Within consciousness is another consciousness. Within consciousness is another consciousness. Within the mind, just more mind. Man's system is arranged so that abstinence from a particular drug can itself become an intoxicant. A man thought, inside of myself I hear something calling to me. It is not my own consciousness, and yet it calls me. To function, the mind must make comparisons. Comparisons breed unrest, annoyance. Those who say that it's difficult to recognize real art when you see it wouldn't know real art if they saw it. Man's imagined exile from a past paradise are aftershocks of speech breaching silence and construction done on the barren plains of consciousness. Cells have a nucleus, dogs have fleas, consciousness has the mind, and our solar system, the sun. Once men aspire to become intellectuals under city conditions, they have two choices: become philosophers and ask questions, or become greeting card writers and supply answers. Life controls the body, life controls the mind. There's nothing a man can profitably do regarding the former. When you can hold consciousness in constant focus, you have more than routine, mentally driven consciousness. One man said, I hear voices. Some men hear voices when they're young, others when they're old. Everyone hears voices, the sane and the not so sane. But one man, at a quite specific time, quite specifically said to himself, I hear voices. Regarding the matter of personality and perceived individuality, consciousness is no particular kind of guy. The personal enjoyment of one's talents is the only audience a real thinker ever needs. To himself a man said, I reserve the right to be conscious without thinking about it. To which his mind retorted with a snort, the right? A conversation. There is only one true warfare. And what might that be? The struggle against death. Nay, it is the resistance to aging. Aren't they the same thing? No, they're not. Well, wait a minute. Let me think about this. Is it that one of them is more physical and the other one more mental? A man wrote to his mind, "Why don't you shut up?" And his mind wrote back, "Why don't you make me?" The mind is never at a loss for words. Bravo, mind. Hooray, mind. The mind is never at a loss for words. A man wrote to his mind and said, "Why don't you shut up?" And his mind wrote back, "Why don't you make me?" If you don't believe that life itself speaks, just listen to your own mind talk. If consciousness were an airline, the mind, sad to say, would be an autopilot. At the odd times this one man was actually at home, he would not allow himself to speak. No one gets the matter of consciousness right the first time around, because the first time around it's supposed to be just like that. Whatever your mind thinks, you stole. Whatever your mind thinks, someone else stole and forced on you. Everything that everybody thinks and stole, life forced on them. If consciousness is like the illumination from a lighthouse, then the mind is like that towering structure filled with the ever-busy descendants of Babel. And glancing toward his own intellect, the man mused, "I wondered where they all went." The landscape of the city. The highlight of many people's lives are their deaths. Note and close with the invoice. Life charges everyone the same. There is no why to what the mind does, such as with a driver who continually curses other motorists mentally, and one day asks himself, "Why do I keep doing that?" But there is no why. The mind just does what it does, and that, dear travelers, is that. Muse the mind. Man, it certainly is difficult to think and simultaneously be focused in consciousness. He further reflected that if this were not so, he would have very little interesting to do in life. A tree looked at its limbs and said, "What do I care if a bird dumps on me?" And a bird looked down at its limbs and said, "What do I care if tree sap sticks to my feet?" And a man's consciousness looked at its mind and said, "I care, I care." The absence of time, the loss of anxiety, the retreat of anger. Many things are possible just beyond the mind. If in your thinking you refer to the lives of others as examples, speak of the living as though they were dead, and of the dead as though they were fictional. Internal meteorology. He looked at his map of consciousness, then at the approaching mental front, and said, "If the weather doesn't clear, I'm out of here." Inside of everybody is somebody else. Some men conclude that this somebody else is not necessarily them. The mind as regards consciousness. A living ink blot on a blotter. A thinker as regards his mind. A man trying to bring an ink blot under control. Another history of man. Disturb the peace, bemoan the uproar, then what? The ability to be conscious beyond the confines of the mind is like being able to fish without ever tossing your bait out of the boat. If they had a theme song, the minds might be in the still of the night, while consciousness would be the night, the day, the stillness, and the other willful wise. Heroes don't have heroes. Heroes are heroes. All dreams of glory are dreams of control. Control of the mind, a clearing of consciousness. Inside of everyone, I'm going back over them now, in case some of you think that you're suffering from deja mustard. Inside of everyone is a voice that is not their own, and guess what it's normally called? Why don't we take a second? Well, they did not actually furnish prizes tonight to hand out, but what the hell we can all think? Guess what it's normally called? Are you guessing? Well, I'll tell you what. The thing that's normally called will not tell you what the correct answer is. But the thing that's normally called will do this. It will look around. It will make every apparently sincere effort to assist you. Many years ago, there was a story I read that I'd made up that had to do with something about catching a burglar in your house, but the way he handles it, in the middle of the night you wake up and there he is and you catch him. And the first thing he does when you holler, "Burglar, burglar!" he grabs his flashlight and all and he jumps right in to offer to help you find him. Where? Where was the noise? Guess what it's normally called? And it will say, "Hey, wait a minute. I can guess. I can help. What do you think he's talking about?" I won't put words in its mouth, but it will help. It will offer to assist. You understand the story of the burglar. All he's got to do is pull that off correctly. That's my intention of the story. And he cannot be caught. I mean, if he sticks with you and encourages you, like, what woke you up? And you say, "Well, a noise." And you look at him like, "Well, you know it was you. I heard a noise." And he says, "Well, what kind of noise? Where? It was upstairs." And he gets in sort of maybe a fighting pose, like, they can't do this to us. And suddenly you and the burglar are partners. I guess if we had people with routine minds, they might say, "Well, that's a silly story. That wouldn't happen." That's ridiculous. Catch a man in your house in the middle of the night, and just because he asks a few questions appears to be on your side, that you would suddenly forget that he was the cause of it? And he starts prodding you along. "Well, hey, you want to go look around? I'll go with you." "I don't know." And you think, that's ridiculous. Right. How about a metaphor that gets completely out of hand? That is, that right in the middle of the sentence, it quits being a metaphor. Now, that's some nerve. Now, of course, I'm about to read it again. If we had our wits about us, I guess some of us, you might even think, back a few seconds ago, you might jump in the middle and go, "What's that noise?" and try to catch that metaphor, beginning to burgle your mind. Catch it. Right in the middle, it begins to, I don't know, begin to act non-metaphorically. All right? It gets noisy. It gets disruptive if you're listening. And so I would say, jump out of bed, run down the middle of the sentence, right there in the middle of the hallway or living room, and say, "All right, what's going on here?" And see what it does to you. I'll hold my finger when we're in the middle. That's where you jump in and catch the metaphor, because it's about to change. Of course, I should wait till it changes and then do it, but then it's too late, see? So, the mind is to consciousness as a ship is to the sea. Picture a wheelhouse, captain. The mind is to consciousness as a ship is to the sea. Except that in man's instance, the vessel now seems to control the medium through which it sails. That is no longer it's not a fit metaphor for man or beast or this time of year in Alaska. You know why? Guess why? Or if you don't like it, ask you know who from a few minutes back. Ask it to help you. Guess why? Doesn't sound familiar? The vessel now seems to control the medium through which it sails. It's easy to dismiss this one, especially early on, item 5. So that's ridiculous. It cannot be. Ha ha. Well, due to much demand, I'll reread item 7, although I have no comment. But once men get a personality, they forget that they were once simply conscious. Although this is the way things normally work, and there's nothing unusual about this, I thought I'd mention it. I guess some of you, I don't know, we'll get them all together. There are 4 or 5 tonight that have to do with inside of everybody, somebody, and blah, blah, blah. This is one of them. Within consciousness is another consciousness. Pause. Second part. Within consciousness is another consciousness, but within the mind, just more mind. Again, insisting, since I'm the one talking, that I am not talking for the sake of playing with words, that what consciousness would be as opposed to what just ordinary intellectual activity would be. Can be felt. They are physical, both of them. But they can be not easily, not every daily, not necessarily, but the difference can be felt. Not knowing that, people believe that the mind, their mind, man's mind collectively, but that the mind is just an infinite possibility. Or some of them like to say it's an infinite storehouse. And many people would like the idea, all the way from mystics to philosophers, to hear, within the mind is another mind. Somebody's probably already said that. But within the mind is not another mind. Within the mind is more mind. You can stretch silly putty as far as you want to. But I assume that all of you people with sufficient playground experience know that no matter how you stretch it, it's still what? Well, I was going to play a chord and we all sing silly putty. No matter what you do to the mind, it's still the mind. The suspicion bordering on certainty unverbalized certainty that within consciousness is another consciousness is what makes people press on with attempts to expand, whether they call it the mind or their consciousness. But it is not the mind that can in some way be, quote, expanded. It is not the mind that is being expanded through such things as a mystical experience, drugs, some great shock that happens to many people just in life that you feel without any doubt, we're not debating it, that you are in a different state. And if you had any interest in it to start with, men find it highly agreeable, and as I pointed out, men will happily, after the fact, will still admit that they were happily spent 40 years in some sort of would-be mystical or some sort of mystical effort to have 40 hours of this state. And will not say that it was not a bargain to spend 40 years having that 40 hours. But what has happened, let's just take the ordinary term of expansion of consciousness, is what most of you grew up around hearing, whether it be mystical or people believe it could be done with hallucinogenic drugs, or it could be done with certain kinds of persistent forays into ritualistic behavior that expand consciousness. And people describe it. And some of you have had the experience. The same people would think, or they would accept the description, that it's another state of mind, or that they expanded their mind. Well, that fooling around was making them think that we were trying to trick them in some semantic manner. But what has truly happened was not mental, not in the sense that in some way they understood. After the fact, they will say, well, I understood more. I saw things I never saw. I saw things about other people. I saw things about human life that I never realized, I never understood. So at least after the fact, if you say, well, to a person, if you said, well, not to try and whittle down verbal debate to the point of driving you and I both nuts, then what happened was a mental process. Am I correct? I mean, as opposed to physical. You might have felt physical sensations when you were in that condition, when you were under the influence of that drug, but what you say that you saw, that was a function of the intellect in some way. And they would go, yes. You know, as opposed to the body, or as opposed to just sensual. It was not when I say that I saw my friend or my wife or my lover in some special way. I'm talking to the other person. They would say, yes, not that I physically saw that they turned into some kind of monster, physically turned into something else. It's that I saw something about them in a different manner. But what my seeing was mental. Yes, they would say, you're correct. Thus, it is that people would agree, would accept, that within the mind are other possibilities, other rooms we've never visited, an infinite possibility or an infinite storehouse, things to be discovered, new scientific laws, new spiritual laws, new spiritual truths, and etc. And it's not true. Within consciousness is another consciousness, but within the mind is just more mind. Yeah. I spent 5 or 6 minutes going through that. You spent 5 or 6 minutes listening. We don't both agree that we wasted our time, do we? There's more about that. A man thought, inside of myself, I hear something calling to me. It is not my own consciousness, and yet it calls to me. Man's imagined exile from a past paradise is the aftershocks of speech breaching silence and construction done on the barren plains of consciousness. Well, I've hit this so many times, but just not in this particular way. But the idea that things were better in the past. I was putting in a sort of a different terminology. That belief that we have lost a superior past, a paradise prior to where we are now. All of that is like debris, aftershocks left over from when speech breached silence, from the time at which the barren plains of consciousness suffered or experienced, and I don't mean suffered in a negative sense, construction thereon. And ever since then there's been smoke, debris, noise, aftershocks, that at one time it was a silent, barren plain, and then speech interfered, intruded. Construction went up where before was nothing. And the reverse echo, for those of you in the recording industry, back when we used vinyl like God intended instead of digital, the reverse echo is such that man's system still feels as though at one time things were better. And therefore things are going to get better. We got to know where to look. Here's another one. I have no comment, but we received so many calls and telegrams requesting that this one be reread that Cells have a nucleus, dogs have fleas. Consciousness has the mind in our solar system, the sun. Here's one that somebody here in the audience requested. We didn't get any calls, or I didn't check, but somebody here in the audience requested this. To himself a man said, I reserve the right to be conscious without thinking about it. And his mind went, the right? Here's one the piano player requested. A man wrote to his mind, why don't you shut up? And his mind wrote back, why don't you make me? Were any of you observing? See, there's another item, and then the same one repeated. First time around, approximately 25 minutes ago, when I read the first one, page 24, and then 26 is the exact same one repeated. For those of you who majored in math, you'll note that, assuming that I am not belying our Arabic heritage regarding numbers, there's an intervening page in there, to wit, page 25. But 26 is an exact duplicate of 24. When I read 24 the first time, there was much response. And was just within seconds, it's a short one, I read 25, then read 26, the same one, which there was a purpose, it's not accidental. When I read it, the same one, page 26, the second time, no response. Did anyone notice that? If so, why? And if not, why? A man wrote to his mind, why don't you shut up? And his mind said, why don't you make me? The mind is never at a loss for words. Bravo, mind. Hooray, mind. The mind is never at a loss for words. A man wrote to his mind, why don't you shut up? And his mind wrote back, why don't you make me? Maybe it was some sort of mystical serendipity. Maybe it was UFOs. Maybe it was an excessive intake of drugs of some kind that made whoever wrote these accidentally repeat it. I've seen worse. You have too. They write it, and a few seconds later, one page later, somebody's mind writes the same thing again. Huh? Of course, if the writer was here and that's what happened, imagine what he would say to his mind. At least he'd say, why don't you leave me alone? I was going to say, why don't you shut up? But I thought maybe you guys are still chewing on that. He might say to his mind, why the hell do you do this to me? Will you stop running me around like this? And his mind wrote back, why don't you make me? Did anybody also notice in both of these items that the man wrote his mind and said, why don't you shut up? And his mind wrote back, why don't you make me? See, there's two lines. You can see it. There's not a third line. The man did one thing, da 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 da, and then the mind did one thing, and that's the end of the item. But now, you know that thing you were trying to guess? That if we stop and rest a minute, I bet that thing can add another line. A man wrote to his mind, won't you shut up? And his mind wrote back, won't you make me? That thing you were trying to guess what it is? We can take a second again. And does not suddenly a third line just come to mind, like just all sorts of other possible, or all sorts of possible third liners. The man wrote back, won't you make me? And the man then replied, da 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 da. I mean, think of them all. But no, two lines. The man wrote to his mind, why don't you shut up? And his mind wrote back, why don't you make me? It would seem to me, nobody asked me to editorialize, but it would seem to me, speaking generically, that could have a more fitting coda to it. A better finish. It doesn't have to be Thompson's water seal. But the man's mind, think of all the things that could have said back. I mean, the man, back to his mind when it says, why don't you make me? I mean, we're dealing here with a man, let's say a 200-pound man, in his mind. Which, if we go ahead and use the physical, we're talking about 4 pounds. Most people don't believe it's 4 pounds. They think the mind is some kind of, invisible something or other. But let's give it 4 pounds. All right? Let's just call it the brain, that the mind's stuck there. The man says, why don't you shut up? And his mind, his brain writes back, why don't you make me? I mean, something seems like it's missing, because the man could go, well, you little 4-pound dumbass, blah, blah, blah. I mean, does a man have to put up with that kind of crap? We're talking about this. We're talking about a 196-pound advantage over this. It would look like, assuming a human wrote this, that they would give the man a bit more credit. Like I said, you should have already done it yourself, the all the things that after the mind said, why don't you make me? Probably, many of you have had experience, I'm just guessing, that many of you have had experience that your mind said something and you thought, boy, I wish I hadn't thought that. You almost had the last word, didn't you? I mean, given that small circumstance, consider that little episode I just portrayed in your life was like a one-page item. That your mind said something, and you went, why did I say that? Why did I think that? Why did I even mentally say that to myself? And that would be like the last line on your little item, because you looked off, came unfocused consciously, and you went on to something else. Maybe even kicking yourself like, well, I'm going to stop that. I don't know, I hadn't been feeling good. You had something. You had the last word. When a man does not have the last word, given any instance, you can pick out, you can segue it. I mean, you can segment it any way you want to. I'm doing it page at a time. You can do your own mental life any damn way you want to. Page at a time, brick at a time, ditch at a time, hole in the carpet at a time. But it does go, that's the difference between consciousness and the mind. And mentation is you go, that's a page. So notice, if you're sane, you always have the last word. That's another definition of, at the ordinary level, what is considered to be people who are insane, is they do not seem to be able to get the final word on their mind. Those of you that were going to major in psychiatry, I know some of you are about ready to start doing your internship. I just saved you a bundle. That is insanity by everyone's ordinary definition. I know they have to keep a job and they have to divide it up. They have to divide up their pages into little smaller and smaller pages so that everyone can major in something, be an expert in something, some little teeny piece. But insanity of all forms is simply people who cannot apparently get the last word over their mind. And they even describe it like, well, my mind drives me crazy. I have an idée fixe. And the man says, I did not go to the Sorbonne. I didn't major in psychiatry in France. What are you talking? Well, I don't know. My mind just drives me nuts. I'll just be walking around my mind and say, wash your hands. And I go, God, I just washed my hands. Or my mind constantly, I just drive down the highway and just people to go by in other cars, my mind constantly goes, where'd you learn to drive? Did you get your license through the mail? And it just goes on and on. And I can't seem to stop it. That is insanity. Well, all the way from neuroses to psychoses, whether you need treatment or not. That's what they're describing. Because you got to have a mind to be nuts, to go insane. But to have mental problems, you got to have a mind. Now, even you and I can figure that out. You got to have a mind to have mental problems. Now, we're not talking about we're not talking about physical ills that you were born with just half a brain, the other half was a bell off of a motor scooter or something. That doesn't count. Anybody can be deformed. That doesn't count. That won't get you anywhere in civilized life. It's got to be mental problems. In other words, they've got to do all the cats and the pets and the dog scans on your brain and find out that physically the doctor has to come in and say, hey, your brain is as good as I've ever seen. Now you've got to, it can't be that they look in there and one half of a brain and half a watermelon or something. you got to physically be all right to have mental problems in this day and age, to be civilized. In other words, you got to physically be fine. Then you're somebody. If you go, well, yeah, but I got mental problems, they go, well, now we're getting somewhere. Psychological. Now we can deal with that. So you've got to have a mind to have mental problems. But after that, no matter how they describe it, whether it be some kind of fixation, whether it be some phobia, do you hear that in that one real sense, within what they consider to be segments of their life, the person that says they have mental problems, the problem is one thing, that they cannot, within whatever segment they consider, it's up to them, that they cannot get the last word on their mind. And they describe it such as, well, my mind's driving me nuts. And of course, a psychiatrist or counselor of some kind will say, well, all right, I know what you mean. You're in the right place. That's exactly what it is. We'll get more technical. They might chuckle when you say my mind's driving me crazy. They kind of chuckle and go, well, we all, colloquial term, but, if you stick with me and pay your bill, I'll teach you better, more fancier terms for that. I mean, it'll sound better at cocktail parties rather than you saying, my mind's driving me crazy. For $120 an hour, you should be able to do better than that. So we'll finally get it classified. And, I got a book here of thousands of classifications that are being added every day, and we'll find one for you. If not, hey, I'll think of a new one. I'm saving you money. It's one thing. That the man himself apparently cannot get the last word on his mind. Back to the item. A man wrote to his mind and said, why don't you shut up? And his mind wrote back and said, why don't you make me? Once you understood all that and you find that some validity, some useful validity in what I've just described in the last 5 or 6 minutes, then may I go ahead and add an extrinsic third line to this one. Just between you and I. It's not really going on the paper. Man wrote to his mind, why don't you shut up? His mind wrote back, why don't you make me? Now, may I ask you, why don't you? You don't have to be nuts. But if you have any problem, and it's not physical, it's what? All right, we'll take some more time, let's everybody guess. All right, if I have problems and it's not physical, it's not physical and it's not material, not just physical on me, but it's not material, then say, what would it be? You guessed it. Well, I'm going to assume you guessed it, because I don't know a better one. It would have to be this. It has to talk to you, or you would not have whatever the problem is. Those of you that want to get persnickety about it, if you didn't think about it, those of you that like to, when it suits your purpose, to go, wait a minute, there's no distinct difference between my mind and myself. I are my mind. Of course, I can talk to somebody and somewhere between 30 and 47 seconds later, have them reverse it. You go, well, wait a minute. No. Now, the kind of things you're talking about, it's like it happens in a man's mental processes, but that's not necessarily what the man himself actually thinks or wants to think. It just sometimes I don't know. That's one good thing about having free psychiatric help like this, is you can think anything you want to. Back to my question. If you have any problem in life, you have any annoyance, any irritation, any complaint, any criticism, any question, in an enlightened, good-natured, helpful manner, when I say criticism, any question about the arrangement of life, the arrangement of you, the arrangement of society, that is a mental problem. It is mentally based. I'll leave it to you to call it a problem. If you say, well, it does bother... Let us say, for instance, that you say, well, it does bother me. I am so critical. I don't always talk about it, but to myself, I am constantly picking at nits. And it almost, I don't mean this literally perhaps, but it almost drives me crazy. I mean, sometimes I get so upset, to tell you the truth, I'll go out and go down the street to a bar and have a few drinks. I don't even care that much about it, but it's like just, to distract myself. So you consider that is, to some degree, a problem. I mean, wouldn't it? Somebody said, well, yes, if I could stop it. I even bought a book on feedback machines. I thought about buying them until I found out how much they cost, and it's cheap. Beer's cheaper than buying a machine. I thought, some way I get hold of my, barley waves or whatever they are in my brain. It is quite simply. No one else wants to hear it this simply in life. They call them spiritual problems, everything else. But again, if you're not suffering from torn ligaments, broken leg, then any problem you have in life that's not material, not physical, it's simply one thing. So, and I assume I'm talking now to a very select audience. Where'd everybody go? Then you've got to understand that once we get it down to a mental problem, in the widest sense, it's up to you to call it. You say a mental problem, something you do not like. And if it's not physically based and it's not material, then it's this. Then nobody else wants to. Well, they did all leave. Jesus. Then you would have to face, if you've gone this far, one simple thing. Whatever the problem is, if you never thought about it again, God, I hate to say this. I know I'll hate myself in the morning. No, I don't have one that'll glow in the dark either. If you didn't think about it, I shouldn't say that. It'd go away. It'd cease to exist. That wouldn't go away. It'd cease to exist. We should be more truthful. Of course, I know children, you have to think, well, it went somewhere. It went away. You understand? Those of you that think that you're no longer children, when you said, I hear noises under my bed. And if you'd had a mother like me, I would have said, guess what it is that you're hearing? Well, that's we've already gone through that one, I know. But you said, I hear something under my bed. And your mother comes in, and finally they come up with some trick. She says, and you say, well, it's some kind of monster that I read about in the book today. And so finally your mother probably says, all right, here's what I got to do. You didn't read all the book, but I know about those monsters. I knew them as a kid. And so she takes a broom or a handkerchief, and she waves on the bed and goes, doodly, doodly, doo. And she says, that makes the monster go away. And it works, okay? But if she says, that makes the monster non-existent. Again, I'm not playing with words. You would not accept that. If you say, all right, it's gone. The kids already thought about it. And she said, well, no, it's not gone. And they would encourage you. They'd whine, cry, do something. And finally, knowing how life's arranged, the mother would finally say, well, trust me, it went away. Then the kid goes, oh, okay. You understand? You can't take something once you have thought about it and find it to be an agreeable conclusion to the affair by someone coming up, whether your mother, a priest, yourself. You can't do it to yourself to start with. To say, all right, what you've been thinking about is gone. And you think, well, the hell it's gone. I'm thinking about it now. No, you paid me. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a counselor. I'm a shaman. Well, shame on you. I don't know. You paid me good money, and so the problem you said you had, the thing you were worried about, trust me, it's gone. It's hard to sell that. Because the people go, well, why am I still thinking about it? It's still bothering me. But if they will simply say, all right, and they do the same little thing, whether they did take your money and do a little something, and they go, all right, it's going away. It will go away. It's gone. Then you can use that. You can go, well, wait a minute, I'm still thinking about it. But he said it's gone, and so it could be just my memory of it. I just hadn't forgotten it yet. And you say, are you sure it's gone? And assuming the circumstances were correct. He did enough magic, and he was the right performer, and you were the right audience. In other words, you wanted to believe it. He says, you say, well, I'm still thinking about it. He says, yes, but it's gone. I do this for a living. I have studied. I know how to do it. The evil thinking that you had is gone. But now, like any bad memory, like if your mother dies, you may think about it, and it almost kills you for weeks, and it kind of decreases. But still, you think about her, don't you? Is your mother dead? And you go, yeah. And he says, well, you don't grieve like you did. You stayed around the house. It almost broke you. Yes, I remember. But then it kind of, But you still think about her. You hadn't just forgotten her just because she's gone. Yeah. All right. the problem you had, the one I worked on, when I went in the back room and I took that bag and took a piece of your hair, or I lit a candle, whatever it was, he says, all right, it's gone. Well, that doesn't mean that just immediately you're going to forget it. And you go, oh, okay. Huh? Yeah, I wouldn't fall for that. Yeah, I know you wouldn't. Well, let's see. If you're 40 years old, that means you've lived how many days, and I'll tell you how many times you fell for it. See, so you can't say that it just doesn't exist. Not with ordinary people. You got to say it's gone away. Because then, you understand the reason I went through all that, because then you can still say, wait a minute, it's not gone away because I'm still thinking about it. And the institution, life, or you, or your mind can say, well, what the hell you want? You got a memory, don't you? Well, yeah. Well, you hadn't forgotten it yet. But it's gone away. Oh, okay. The problem, when I was back where we were, when I said no one wants to hear it, and I went through the remarks about I shouldn't say this, and I'll hate myself in the morning. I should tell the truth. I won't. I'll hate you in the morning. Well, I read a course, and I found a more efficient way to handle hatred. It's better, I found out personally, to hate you in the morning rather than myself. Try it. Hey, it's free. You don't have to buy the book. I spend the money. There it is. The little joke, was that people do not want to hear the fact, to understand that all problems that are not physical slice material are one thing. They're here and that's it. And then to face, and you can get people that far. They don't like it necessarily, especially if you're kind of loud and brash about it and go, I come off that. It's all up here. You might drag them up a little bit. Well, go ahead. I'll listen a while longer. And then say, all right, if it's all up here, your problem, think about this. I screw thinking about this. We're in a hurry. I'll tell you how to cure it. They say, how? Don't think about it anymore. Then they're delighted that they didn't pay you any money up front. They're going to say, that's the cure? Or that's a cure? That's your cure? Nuh-uh. That's the cure. Now it's far too, you want to fill in the blank, you want to guess what it is? How about simple? How about direct? How about point blank? How about true? So, back to the atom. Not for it to go away, you see, because the mind can write you back if you say, why don't you shut up? And the mind writes back, why don't you make me? Remember the mother coming in and you holler, something's on the bed frightening me. That obviously can't be your mind, but there's something under the bed frightening me, and she says, all right, I'll look. And she says, there's nothing there. In other words, you're wrong, there's nothing there. And the kid goes, assuming they're a decent kid and some manners, I was going to clean up what their act. They say, well, don't tell me it's not there. I'm thinking about it. Then she has to go, all right, and then do the handkerchief thing and go, bugga, bugga, boo, 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 go away. And she says, it's gone. And the kid says, well, why am I still thinking about it? And the mother's down on her knees looking at the baby. She says, well, it's gone. But you know how memory is. Like when you cut your finger and it hurts and I kiss it and I'll say it's all right and you'll smile. Yeah. And you know it's all right. Yeah. But it still hurts for a little while. Yeah. Well, it's gone. The monster's gone. You're just still thinking about it. Because you got frightened. It happens even to adults. And you go, okay. Because you can't make it. You can't do it with a kid and look in the bed and say, there's nothing there. So that'd be the end of all religion, psychiatry. Worse than that, that'd be the end of all mental distress, all mental problems. And that, now if you can see, that is exactly why the mind cannot accept, wait a minute, it's gone. Or it's not there to start with, which is really bad. Don't ever do that. Because it is there, or they wouldn't have thought it, right? They got you there. No, that's like going into psychiatry and say, I've got mental problems. And he said, well, I can tell you're crazy. He said, I'd like to take an opinion, and you know the rest. You can't just tell somebody, you go into a psychiatrist and say, I have mental problems. He said, well, give me, how much money you got? And you say, in the bank and CDs and all, I got $50,000. He said, give it all to me, and I'll wipe them out. And you sign it over, and he says, all right, you got no problems. It's all in your mind. We're looking at serious fisticuffs, probably. Because you cannot do that. It's a psychiatrist, a priest, life itself says, nah, that's your imagination. What you're calling a problem is not a problem. And some of them just seems obvious except to the person having the problem. Like, well, there's bugs all over my hands. I have to wash at least once every 30 minutes or they get larger and larger. And people say, oh, there's nothing there. It's your imagination. I'm using an extreme example, but that's still the reality of people thinking something's under the bed. People saying that their mind is driving them crazy. Outside, somebody can say, well, you got such a decent life. You got a nice family. Why do you keep saying you're going nuts? I don't see the basis of it. There's something under my bed, which is the same thing as saying a man telling his mind, won't you shut up? Why it will not work in one sense, when I said it was too simple, is you cannot go to a psychiatrist. I wasn't just making a joke or repeating an old one and say, I've got mental problems. And the guy said, well, you tell him a little something about it. He said, well, you're right. It's mental problems. He said, was there any help for me? And he said, well, I can sign you on and run you out until you die twice a week at $120, or you're going to give me $50,000 now, and I'll tell you. Or maybe it's charity day, and he says, right, I'm just going to tell you, rather, I don't need the business anymore, I'm about to retire. I'm just going to tell you free. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to cure you. You didn't think psychiatry could cure people, did you? Well, not really. All right, I'm fixing to leave town. I'm going to a new profession. What the hell? I'm going to tell you. You know how to handle it? How? Quit thinking about it. Boy, aren't you glad you didn't pay? That's not just a joke. You do understand by now. That will not go. That's no answer except for this. There is no better answer. That answer is so big. That's the kind of answer that Moby Dick would look around and go, God damn, I'm getting the hell out of here. He's going to put me on a cracker and use me for a sardine sandwich. That's the kind of answer that is. When I say I can say it's too simple and too direct. It's also too gigantic. Well, come on. It's like you tell somebody, all right, I'm going to tell you the answer to your mental problems. And you say, you'll quit thinking about them. That's like you have suddenly been able to pull in every molecule in the universe. When I say it's too simple, it's also too gigantic. You have brought the whole universe. It's like, all right, don't take just my word for it. And it's like, okay, come on. And the whole of the reality suddenly is behind you, and you tell a person. In reality, all of reality, the whole universe is right over your shoulder, and they see it just for a split second. Nod its head, vouching for it, agreeing with you, and you go, quit thinking about them. And all of reality goes, yep. And you're just, you're blinded, you're staggered, and it's not operational. The man writes to his mind, why don't you shut up? And his mind writes back, why don't you make me? And I ask you, well, why don't you? You didn't forget that's what we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes. Why don't you? Now, ordinarily, you can't. And you cannot at that level. You cannot with that kind of approach. With the mind saying, well, why don't you stop me? You can go, all right. My God, let's roll up our sleeves here. I got another 20 or 30 years left in my life. I don't have to take this crap off of a 4-pound thing up here. Come on. How about something large enough to have Moby Dick as an hors d'oeuvre, and it's also made out of tar? Hey. Huh? The mind says, why don't you make me? You guys still don't remember the Burr Rabbit story, the tar baby? Hey, take your best shot. Why don't you make me? Ordinary people can't do it. They don't see it's too gigantic, it's too simple. I'm asking you, though. Why don't you? Because the mind does, in essence, say that. It does, in essence, when you're saying, well, boy, I don't like the way I am. That's what it's saying is, won't you make me shut up? No ordinary person would ever translate the feeling, the verbalization of man's destiny, his supposed destiny, his assumed fate, his dreamed of spiritual future. All of that is a sense of the mind saying, well, why don't you make me? Why don't you? I still like, nobody asked me, but I did. I like the 2-line version. A man wrote to his mind, why don't you shut up? And his mind wrote back, why don't you make me? Funny. Fini for Friday. Alliterations for Albuquerque.